Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Okay guys, today's guest on the show is someone I met through a mutual friend of ours, and when we immediately hit it off, I knew I wanted to have him on the show. And the best part was that he actually flew up to Boston to do this episode live in person. Within this episode, we cover a lot of ground when it comes to psychedelics, his experiences with them, his affinity for breathwork and being a breathwork facilitator, and much, much more. So, make sure you strap in and put your curiosity caps on for this episode as I welcome my man Ryan Anderson to the show. Ryan, my man, it is so amazing to have you here with me, and a bonus being in person. I'm so pumped, man. So glad you're here.
Stoked to be here, brother. It's been good connecting with you.
It has. We got to watch Sugar's fight last night, or at least we got to meet up at the beer garden beforehand, have some amazing battery charging conversations, got to watch him KO Alja, and it was an amazing fight. Got to do some amazing breath work right before we came here. We've had a time, man.
Been a good time, brother. Easy to jam with you.
Absolutely, man. You know, vacation vibration to the max, which is the vibration that I like to live on.
I agree. Totally.
Hell yeah. Well, man, you know, where I love to start these episodes, right? Because this is a psychedelic podcast, is not just about psychedelics in general, but also like the psychedelic nature of reality. And that's where we're going to go on a trajectory today, right? Okay. But I would love if I could hear from you, because I've heard part of your story before, how you first became interested in psychedelics and maybe a little bit of your background, you know, like anything you're comfortable sharing, like, you know, because from my understanding of hearing your story so far, you weren't always a psychedelic proponent. It wasn't that maybe you were against it, but you just didn't utilize them for a lot of your life. And then you did. And I'd love to hear kind of like that trajectory and kind of where that sent you. And then we'll take it from there.
So where does it begin for me? I think with that trajectory, I'd say, first of all, I think the way you and I met was through Robert Forte.
Yes.
Good friend of mine, Emil, connected us. He goes, "Hey man, have you ever heard of Robert Forte?" I said, no. He goes, "You're going to love him." And I met Emil in the jungle, which is a pretty cool short story. We'll get into that later. But I check you out, I listen, and I had to hear it twice. And yeah, I've been reading about psychedelics and interested in that space since 2010, I'm guessing. Pretty bad with that time frame, but about that time. And I'd say it started with floating, really, float tanks. And I didn't even know what meditation was at the time. I'd heard about it on a podcast. I look up the first float center I could find. Sounded interesting, being in a big giant bubble, being alone with yourself. It sounded cool. It was more of a field trip. So I headed over to this float center. I hop in. I realize, holy shit, I want to get out of here. My mind is busy. What do I do? You know, so I stayed put. I paid the money. It was worth the stay. I stayed, got out of it. After the end, I started writing down some things and saying, man, my mind is busy. I need to go back. Went back 3 times. And I think on my third float, I had my first epiphany experience or big experience. And I started to see my thoughts outside of myself. I wasn't my thoughts for the first time. And I didn't really have any language or understanding or context for that experience. So I got out of that float and I wrote some things down, and I started to tell some close friends, and immediately I was hooked. I went, this is the antidote to our overstimulated culture, sensory deprivation, and started reading some books on that and started finding John Lilly's work, The Deep Self and The Quiet Center, some beautiful books. But during that same time frame, I also started to explore consciousness in other ways. It starts to lead you into doorways, like what is this thing called consciousness? For some reason, I went 25, 26 years without thinking at all about it, to be honest. I was grown up Christian. I sort of had a deep faith without going to church too often, but I remember laying in bed at night and just having a deep prayer focus of like, you know, the general thank you, God, for this and that. And I always felt like I had God on my side, but I had this more of a disciplinary, judgmental God version of my connection to God at that time. But I didn't really get too spiritual or interested in the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, until I started slowing down and self-reflecting. And I didn't even know truly what yoga was, what meditation was. good friends of mine were starting to ask me questions about like, what is going on? My hair grew long pretty quickly and I became a hippie, and I started to think, well, I need to go, and my culture doesn't understand me. I had my own counterculture revolution like you saw in the 60s, which is not the right answer. Sort of like F culture. They don't understand me. I'm just going to abandon all of it. And I even considered about 8 years in quitting the fire department and heading off to like Chile and just starting to go explore and learn. And then I started to realize and read and watch documentaries and try to uncover the history of these things. And I'd even watched documentaries about Christianity and theology, and it led me to many books, Alan Watts, and they all started coming to me at that same time frame, Joseph Campbell's work, and then different ways of exploring consciousness came in. And I had to be mindful of that because I live in a culture, as we all do, where these things are demonized, and the way people think about these things has been engineered in a way that they've been kept from us. For many different reasons. And that's where you get into Robert Forte's work and you start to see it's a big, giant, socially engineered systemic problem. I probably didn't come into Robert's whole field of interest until a little later. I was caught up in the hype of it. Everybody can use these. These are great. This is going to be good for everybody. And I myself started to feel the benefit of them, as most people do. But I didn't have the context. And I think that's the piece that is missing for most people, is the context. And so anyway, that's where the journey started to begin, and it just went deeper and deeper and got more fascinating. But then as I've gotten older, it's gotten far more conservative, and I've come back to realizing that these are just non-specific amplifiers and tools. And I've witnessed the commercialization and the weaponization and this whole, rainbows and butterflies, and these things are great. And I've seen terrible things happen with them. And I think they can be used for good, but I think that there's a lot of bad that can come from it. And I like to be a voice for the pushback at this point and say, hold on a minute, before let's pump the brakes a little and let's bring some awareness to it, and let's start to consider all of the variables, and let's make better new mistakes and not keep driving this thing off the same rails that we did in the 1960s. So anyway, I'll give you a little moment to speak here because I'm on a rant, but that's where it all began, and it's come full circle to the point where I think I respect the shit out of these things. I've learned from some great teachers, Don Howard being one of them. And from him, someone who was 72 when I met him, he was just very careful with them, but also had to take some major risks to get where he got. But I got to hear a lot of the bad things that happened in his journey and what he saw over the last 50 years. And so it made me a far more conservative person when it comes to these things. Yeah. And anyway, that's where it began, brother. And there's a lot more we can say and go into, but yeah.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Dude, I am just like blown away because there are so many similarities between our journeys. The slowing down, specifically like the first epiphany being, I am not my thoughts. I had that happen with cannabis when I was 16, had no fucking clue what to do with that information, had no idea how to articulate it. All I knew is that something shifted. And that then started an ever-expanding quest of curiosity. And that's another common theme I see amongst you and I is curiosity, right? And being able to dive into this realm that's called consciousness, right? Which is really, I think, as close to the term infinity as we can get, right? I don't know if there are any borders to consciousness. And I was recently talking to Hamilton Souther, and he was talking about how he truly believes that exploring consciousness is completely safe. The only challenge or thing that could be, let's just say challenging, is us meeting ourselves in that, right? And how we deal with that, And so he's very big as well on being very conservative around these medicines, right? And, this is a big reason I started the show, right? It's not just to talk about, getting high or these kind of things. It's to allow people to have a place they can go, a platform they can go onto to hear the amazing things that can happen,
sure,
but also all the challenges that can happen too, because, no tree's branches can reach to heaven if its roots don't first reach to hell, right? And so it's like the yin and yang balance, right? And then from there, you can wield the power of discernment, and hearing your, journeys with Don Howard and everything like that. We're definitely going to be getting into that. But it's just amazing how, synchronicities play out. I mean, you finding me through the Robert Forte episode. Now we're here in person. Feels like we've known each other for 10 million lifetimes. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing how those things happen and how, I think one of the most beautiful aspects of these medicines, along with giving me beautiful realizations and epiphanies in my life, is the people I've connected with, like yourself, that now we get to go on these amazing adventures and we get to spark curiosity in one another and we get to expand our consciousness, right? Which is why I'm such a big fan of saying that life itself is the psychedelic. It's just that people are so overstimulated that they have yet to really sink into what that could mean for them, right? Like you meet another human being, right? And you start experiencing synchronicities and you start realizing that we all come from the same source. And you start having these awarenesses that there are so many different things that are parallel between journeys. And it's like, what's happening? Well, that is exactly what happens during a psychedelic medicine experience, right? You're getting epiphanies, you're gaining awareness, you're starting to put two and two together. Sometimes you're just laughing uncontrollably. All of the things that can happen in a completely sober state of reality, right? And that's why I think that Bible quote is one of my favorites. If you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter the mind of a child, right? Because a child, even if they've seen, let's say 300 trees, they haven't seen that one. So that tree is brand new, as if they've never seen a tree before, right?
Sure.
Same with an airplane, same with questioning, right? The age old kind of like, conversation where a child asks an adult why, right? And typically they can get to like 3 levels of why before an adult's just like, 'cause it's the way it is, right? And that's always really made me laugh a little bit because, I'm someone who definitely has my days where I'm short with someone or whatever, or I don't see that magic, but it's always there waiting. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of your journey is that, what you're articulating to me is that once you started diving in and saying, okay, what else is possible? The universe responded, right? And Paul Chek always says, no matter what you ask Great Spirit, the answer is always yes, right? And that's why it's so important to be intentional because if you're not intentional, then you're still getting yes, but for stuff that you don't want,
sure. Amplifying the ego or whatever parts of yourself that you maybe don't want to amplify.
Exactly.
I remember hearing Graham Hancock even saying, we need to give these things to politicians. And it's like, maybe not.
Yeah.
I mean, without the right context, it just amplifies their ego. And I've seen people that I know that will probably never touch these things. And they're some of the greatest people I've ever met. And I started to realize that later, thinking, oh, they're missing out. They don't understand this stuff. They're not on the path of discovery, of cracking open this mystical world, because the mystery is what comes from it. And I think you start to really appreciate the mystery and go, oh yeah, I forgot what it was like to be 3 and to be 5 and to be 7 and the awe and the wonder. And that's the medicine actually to me, is like surrendering into the mystery and getting curious again. And that's the beauty of it, if done correctly. And you can tap into the nervous system and the heart space, hopefully in the right context. And you learn how to surrender and let go and to trust the process of life. You can take that outside of that experience and bring it into your life. But I know plenty of people that are pretty conservative and they have different backgrounds now that I see are great husbands and great fathers, and they can build homes and build cars and they treat their kids good and they have the most amazing moral ethical compass. Some of them I work with closely, like I work at the firehouse with these guys and they may never touch any of this stuff. And I've realized like, that's all right. They're not actually missing anything. I don't know what it's like to be a father of 3 kids, to have a wife of 22 years and to love that person through the thick and thin. And so they've experienced life itself in a different kind of way that I can't even wrap my head around. And yet they show up and I trust them with my life. And some of the people on this path of the so-called spiritual journey or the psychedelic journey have gotten a little lost in the weeds. And I think they get to this point where there's a virtue signal component to it, where they're like, here's my spiritual passport. I've done ayahuasca 55 times. I've done this. I've done bufo. I'm a hot bay guy, and that's fine. I try to respect everyone's path, but I also realize like, how many times are you going back to the wishing well bliss junkie. Like you're just checking in and you're blissed out. You're trying to feel good, but you never integrated the first experience, which takes a lifetime. I mean, you don't have to go to the jungle to be healthy. You don't even need it. We only had access to it since we built planes. The average person would have never conceived of going over there. So I always tell people, you probably shouldn't do it. If you want to, you should. You don't want to have regrets on your deathbed, but don't do it in a warehouse in LA with some neo shaman.
With Popeyes.
And somebody with a big brimmed hat and the beads and the soft talking, and they just had their first experience and now they're sharing it with other people. And that's what's going on. I see it. Like I just went to the MAPS conference and there was 11,000 people there, and it was a giant sales event. And there was beautiful humans there, but there were so many people that were in costume and they were glorifying it. And there was all the rainbows and butterflies, and the capitalists were there and the business people were there, and everybody had a ketamine clinic. And, it's like this guy just had his first ketamine experience and now he's serving it to other people and he's making 10 grand a pop. And I think it's a mess, to be honest. And I really care about these things because I've had such an in-depth experience learning and reading and exploring and being careful with them over time. And I really want to preserve the thing from going off the rails. I think I want to be one of the people that at least everyone within my little framework of experience, like I have this conversation with. And it doesn't even have to be any kind of psychedelic. The breathwork, that's where that actually came from. I found it later. I wish I'd found it 25 years ago. Because it can be its own psychedelic experience in a way that just puts you into a non-ordinary state of consciousness for a little bit, if you want. And you can ease into it with your own breathing in the right environment, and you can surrender and you can let go. And if you don't like the way it feels, you come back to your anchor. That's slow it down. Okay, cool. It's like exposure therapy. I can ease into this and I can use my own breath to get there. And I love watching people do that, because some people that would never even consider using these things, which is awesome. I respect that. Maybe they shouldn't. They can use the breath and get to the exact same spaces, which some people don't believe. I'm like, come on down. I'll show you. And it's actually, be a skeptic, because the breath is so powerful, and it's the ultimate tool as well. If you ever do decide to do a ketamine therapy or any kind of non-ordinary state experience, I think the breath is your anchor. It's your compass and it's your guide. And you can use it in these ways that can actually change your nervous system. And so anyway, the breath work came in way later, and I think it's underrated because it's not profitable and people can't capitalize on it. And that's why ketamine's legal and psilocybin mushrooms aren't, because big pharma and all the profit that can go along with it. But it's probably the least effective, least safe, and the most problematic, as much as it's given people benefit that I even know. But I'm like, yeah, you don't need the clinical setting as well. That's one way to do it. It's beautiful that it's there, and I'm glad that they're going that route. But at the same time, if I was to think of people I love, I'd imagine them in a creek in a beautiful day, and eating something that grew in nature and has been around for millions of years in the right environment with the right person. I'm not saying people should go do this, but I can imagine that if my father was going to do it, that's the way he's probably going to do it, not with earmuffs on in some therapist setting. And, I think all these things should be looked at with just a little bit of awareness. And we should have the broader conversation that, like, maybe it's not all trauma. Maybe it's about enjoying your life and preventing trauma. Maybe that's what cannabis can be too, or any of these therapies. And the whole trauma conversation is important and beautiful, and we should get into that at some point. But it's become an overused blanket statement, and it's over identification with this victim narrative. And human history is trauma. Right? Everyone's got it. I've got it. I mean, I'm adopted, and I could look at that as like, man, if I only knew my parents, and if only this. And it's like, no, my relationship since I was a little kid has been like, thank you for these cool parents that decided to go out of their way to adopt me. So it's really our relationship to our experience that is the ultimate medicine. And I think that's foundational for anything. And even with these tools, breathwork or these plants or anything, people can be now indoctrinated with this victim narrative and say, I'm healing. Next thing you know, they're self-healing for the next 20 years and going to the next workshop and the next medicine journey. And it's like, well, when do you ever get back to helping others? That's Jamie Wheel's message, which I really love, like the 80-20 principle, where you first 20% of your journey, or first 5%, you get the most robust bang for your buck return. And then you're like, if I spend the rest of my life chasing that next experience, I'm going to be a Jedi master. And it's like, no, you're just a narcissistic, self-help seeking, lost child. And I think it's important to just go back, put your boots on, slow down, and see what you can do to get back into service mode. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, dude, that was beautiful. And I'm so glad you're bringing these things up because this is exactly what I've seen firsthand in the industry. I mean, I'm a coach, right? So I work with clients all day, every day. And I work with them in medicine. I also work with them in a completely sober state. And there is this affinity for healing right now. And there's nothing bad with healing, right? That's not my message here, right? It's not your message either, right? But the idea is, are you truly just looking to heal all of the time? Because you can get addicted to healing, right? Like that's a lot of what's going on in the medicine space, right? It's now become trendy to be healing trauma, right? I was just talking with Rachel about this the other night about how trauma, I don't particularly like that word because it could mean that you just almost died in a car accident, or it could mean that like, you know, your partner left the dishes out and it traumatized you, right? Like it's become this word that doesn't have depth to it anymore, you know, and I'm a big language nerd, right? And you were talking about stories as well. And that's a whole thing, right? Like if you're telling yourself the story that say you were adopted and it's the worst thing ever, then guess what? Abracadabra. It will be the worst thing ever. And I think that's the thing I see is that people are very unaware in a majority sense, obviously not generalizing, but most people are kind of putting the cart before the horse. They're looking to go to back ayahuasca sessions, but they have no idea about mindset work or how the stories that are running in the unconscious are controlling your life, right? Or your life. And it's like the famous quote from Carl Jung, right? Until you bring the unconscious into the conscious, you'll walk throughout your whole life and expect that everything happening to you is fate, right? And that at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you know, if you have a car with 800 horsepower, but you have no idea how to drive it, well, that is now a weapon. Sure. It's not actually something that you can have fun with, right? Or take to the drag racetrack or something. It's dangerous. Exactly. And so this is my whole thing too, and why I'm so big on educating, why I'm so big on allowing people to realize like, hey, you're not addicted to cannabis, let's say, for instance, right? In my line of work, you're addicted to getting away from a feeling of discomfort. And until you take accountability for that, you'll keep going after the wrong issue. Sure. Like cannabis dependency, right? Or going to ayahuasca ceremonies every weekend, or even being addicted to alcohol or anything, right? Like, you know, we live in a society that wants to really focus on the coping strategy as the problem, right? And in reality, it's not the actual issue. It's the result of the issue. And until you deal with the issue, you're just going to be switching from one coping strategy to another. Sure. Now, maybe you'll switch from something like alcohol or heroin into exercise, right? So society would say, well, that's healthy, right? But if you still hate yourself, that's not healthy. And you're not going to be able to show up as a father, a husband, a wife, a friend, whatever you identify as, right? You're not going to be able to show up fully because you've yet to create the necessary space within yourself to be able to actually truly love yourself. And that to me is really the work, right? If we're going to take that word, that's another word that's like very charged in my vocabulary, right? Is the work, right? Because work to me, when we think about it, could either mean I'm going to work at Staples or I'm going to work on my heart, right? So like I like to figure out a different word, and I like to exchange working on myself for loving on myself, right? I'm doing the love, right? That's what I now state in my vocabulary when I'm going into, maybe look into why I'm having a coping strategy pop up, or why I'm being short with Rachel, or why I'm being frustrated or feeling bitter at work or something like that. And I think the more that we just throw more things in, because it's so easy to add, but it's harder to subtract, right? And I think just like you were saying in breathwork today, the stillness is what really scares us, because that's when we actually get to meet ourselves. And the best part of this is, though, for everyone listening, and the most liberating thing that I've found is that you're not broken, right? No matter how much trauma you think you have, no matter what's happened in your life, you are not broken. There are simply aspects of yourself that you've yet to accept, right? And things that have happened in your life might not have been your fault, but they are now your responsibility. And that might not seem fair, but at the end of the day, what movie or any story that you've ever read has started out with, yeah, so-and-so started, they had $1 million, they started the business and life is great. It's like, that's not really a story, right? There's the hero's journey, right? And so a big part of my own life has been transcending these stories, right? From, oh, my dad passed and all of these things. Woe is me. I have anxiety, all of these things, to like, bullshit. Those are all just stories. And I know this can be super triggering, but if you really tune into this, it's triggering for all of about 5 seconds until you realize that you just took all of your power back. And that is like really why I do everything I do, is to remind people like, hey, I can be a reminder for you. I'm not the one that empowers you. You're the one that maybe hears something and is able to empower yourself. And the best part of that is when you empower yourself, you can be a beacon, a lighthouse for other people to empower themselves on, right? Beautiful. And there's nothing you need to do, right? Like that's one of the biggest, interesting things that happens when you get into coaching or any of this stuff, breath work, anything, is that you're just allowing, you're just opening a container and people get to make whatever they want out of it. And so I'm really glad you brought that up because that is something that I see a lot in this space. And it's funny you brought up ketamine too. I have a very good buddy of mine who is a doctor of medical Qigong. He's an incredible guy, one of the most intellectual and heart-centered individuals I've ever met in my life. And he's had a lot of traumatic brain injuries from motocross when he was a kid. And so he went to a ketamine clinic. I won't mention the name, but somewhere in California. And they dosed him and then they left. They closed the business and forgot about him, right? And they overdosed him. And so he had to crawl out of the seat into the waiting room, right? And no one was there. And it was only someone walking by the store that saw him on the floor and called the police. And that's the only reason he got out of that, right? So this is someone who is extremely advanced in medicine, right? You're talking, he works with 5-MeO and he's someone that's studied this for a long time. So if you know 5-MeO, that's pretty close to the top of experience, right? So this is someone that has all the tools. This is someone that knows all the info. And still this happened, right? Yeah. So it's very important that we're aware of where we're going, right? Because this place even came recommended, you know? And so, the medical model, hey, at the end of the day, if we want everyone to be able to have access to these, not everyone to do them because they're not for everyone, but we at least want everyone to have access. Well, maybe someone like my mom would trust a medical model more because she was brought up in a time that she trusted people in white lab coats, right? For me, I'm not really that person, right? Because I've had my own experience as a doctor. So I'd prefer the creek, right? I think this pharmaceutical venture capital approach to psychedelics is awkward. It's just like I talked about with MJ BizCom when I was telling you my origin story. It's just a really awkward energy for anyone that really loves these medicines and has true sacred regard for them. When you walk in and you see people in suit and ties just trying to do sales pitches to you, it's really awkward. That's one thing when it's real estate. It's another thing when it's sacred medicine, So yeah.
Yeah. I agree with all of what you said. And one of the things circling back to the trauma thing is I believe that trauma is important to consider and focus on and that we all have our healing and work to do. I've had to do a lot of my own to stay healthy and happy and strong as in my own life. And it's been beautiful to see and to learn about it and to read the books about trauma and to learn about the nervous system and the body keeps the score and all that and the Gabor Mate work and all that's beautiful. But then when you start to read one of my favorite books by Viktor Frankl, who you're probably familiar with, God, he was a Holocaust survivor. This is the opposite of the narrative that's being pushed right now when it comes to the trauma models. And you get the logos therapy and you get this relationship with narrative. And it's not just the story that we tell ourselves and about the world, but it's really how we choose to make that story feel. And certain stories are obviously empowering and certain ones are very emotionally traumatizing. And I think just the idea that you're victimized and that you feel like oh, poor me, this happened to me, instead of no, it made me better, stronger, and it actually gives me more opportunity to serve others and connect with others. So he became of service and had meaning. And I think right now what's missing in our culture from what I can gather is meaning, meaning making even knowing that you can make meaning with your narratives. And it's a nihilistic situation. And we have these weapons of mass distraction, the TikTok and the Soma, any of these things that have been used against us, and even the microdosing hype. It's a lot of it's bullshit. A lot of it's just oh, I've been microdosing, and it's so what does that mean to you when you say microdosing? Is oh, I had a gram. Well, you're just doing mushrooms.
Yeah.
And a little bit of them. And then it's almost like pain management, psychological pain management. So now you're just dosing yourself to feel good, which is fine. Do whatever you want. I think humans should have freedom, first of all, especially once you're of age and your brain's developed. I think we should have hands off when it comes to cognitive liberty. I think that's bullshit that we haven't questioned authority up to this point already. We're idiots.
Yeah.
Who is to say the government should be involved with how I relate to my own consciousness, right? I can go to the pub right now and have 40 beers and there's cars in the parking lot and then they're all gone at the end of the evening. Now they're all on freeways. And after 18 years, I've seen major problems with alcohol and pharmaceuticals, and I've probably never been on a mushroom call in my life. I'm not trying to glorify it, but I'm just talking the truth about what is the true narrative here, right? Like, why are these things illegal? Why aren't we questioning these narratives, these stories and these authorities? And now, Rick Doblin's and the whole MAPS community and we got to go the trauma model. It's being pushed and invested in, and it's great because now they're going to maybe get there's some good components to it. But look at the investors that he's tied to. Look at the people pulling his strings now and who he's in control by. I don't think he's very happy about that. But it's almost like having a gun to your head. And you're a hostage to a bunch of people that he probably maybe naively got involved with, like you and I could easily get swept into in life. And I think it's respectable. And I think that as a human being, he's a brother on the planet, and I respect people's journey, but it's like, this is dangerous. And I love Robert Forte's message right now because he's one of the only ones tying it back to the 1950s and the 1960s and MK Ultra. And people look at you like you're a whack job when you talk about this stuff. But once you probe in and want to seek truth and understand the nature of reality, which is the whole point, I think, to seek to understand more about the nature of reality. You'll never understand all of it. You'll never have the whole truth. It's just going to get more interesting, more weird, more beautiful, and you're going to discover more and more and more. It's like an onion. It keeps going and going and going, and you start to find out how corrupt it actually is. And until you're willing to recognize that dark component of the situation and that there is socially engineered scenarios, especially with this psychedelic renaissance, I think it's more dangerous than not. So I actually think that's the first place people should start is context, history, even Brian Murarescu's work. Start to read about, like, where did these things come from? I wish I had the context before I dipped into certain things. Even floating, like, what is meditation? Where did it come from? Where did the mystics get all this stuff? I had no language for it whatsoever. And now I'm like, let's be careful, because when you start to go into these realms, you can also deceive yourself. You don't want to buy it like Richard Feynman. He's always like, question yourself and your own. And so did Robert Anton Wilson. He's a hero of mine. He always says everyone has BS, belief systems. And that's actually what drives your whole life, your narratives. And everyone's running around from our culture and from being born into it with a whole bunch of indoctrinations, and they're tied to emotions. So now you're just being swept along as a walking, talking nervous system that's got a whole bunch of different narratives. And it's like the Matrix at some degree until you have time to go in and just try to look at it. And it takes courage. It really does. I think it's one of the greatest things you can do. But then I always think too, maybe it's not. Maybe some people should just stay busy, and we need plumbers and doctors and teachers and parents, and maybe that's just what I'm into. I've even realized, like, maybe that's just my niche. I've just had to give myself permission to do it because I'm truly curious. And that's what I find. I'm reading for 5.5 hours Robert Forte's website, and I'm like in this coffee shop 2 days later, and I'm like, this is amazing. And then I think, who the fuck else is reading this? Nobody. And like maybe 300 people, maybe more now, but I just find it interesting. I'm like, okay, well, some people are golfing today and some people are, running at this company over here. And it's like, just do what you love and, try to be of service, try to explore. But, this whole field of the psychedelic renaissance is a big, weird, messy, interesting situation. And when you start to mess with people's cognition, which is first principle, that's the thing that makes us human. The self-aware, self-motivated, these weird humans that are conscious beings. We better be careful how we start to alter this. And I've been around some amazing people like Howard, got so blessed to be around a guy who truly lived from his heart. It wasn't about how to change your mind, the Michael Pollan rap. Good for him. I can give that book to some really skeptic people and they can go, wow, cool. Maybe I can change my mind. And this guy, Michael Pollan's doing it. He's a conservative kind of guy. But Howard was like, how do you change your heart? How do you open the heart? How do you feel more and become a little more of service? And it was actually about that. And that's the old models that I think were passed down for a long time. And now you see the commercialization and the people just trying to get famous with it. And there's a whole bunch of different incentivization structures that are in place that are driving it in ways that we don't want to allow it to go, I don't think.
100%.
So anyway, I'm keep going back to the conservative element of it. As much as I respect these things, like any superpower, we better be careful with them. Just like TikTok. My friend yesterday, Tony, has got these beautiful kids and they're not allowed on the phone. We're all having dinner. They're running around. They're these amazing little beings. And he's actually going to save their life because their life force energy is their attention, their mind, and we're just giving these kids these pacifiers and they're on TikTok and they're being influenced by these different companies for different reasons and they're raping their attention and they're raping their dopamine and serotonin, right? And so I think that there's a whole generation of kids that are 18, 19, 16, and they're junkies. They don't even know it. They're like heroin addicts. You can't even have a conversation with them, unfortunately. Not all of them, but a huge sweep. We're going to lose a lot. And they have withdrawals. If you take them off these things, they don't know what to do. They can't get jobs. They can't even, our server last night to watch the UFC couldn't come over and just check our table because she was too busy on her phone. And so I just feel like we're losing the war of attention. And one of these wars is technology. And one of them is, and that's narrative control and mind control. And it's not like some big guy in a dark room. It's more like all these different people incentivized to capture attention, the whole attention economy. And then the psychedelic renaissance, when you dig into Robert Forte's work, which I recommend everybody at least look at with a skeptic eye and listen to it with an open mind. Not all of it's 100% correct, but he does know a certain component of this narrative that needs to be looked at. That's why I immediately sent him over to Kyle. Then I sent him another one. He hadn't listened. Then when he listened, he's like, oh my God, I got to get this guy on. I'm like, send him to anyone that can get this guy heard, because people like yourself are willing to have the harder conversation around this space, which most people won't. And they demonize anyone that talks negatively about any of it. And, you know, you go to a yoga studio and everyone soft talks. And sometimes you go to New Jersey, which I was just at, and they're like, hey, brother, what? You're an asshole. They talk straight to you. And
yes.
At the end of the day, they serve you good food. They're nice to their neighbors. I think we need more balance and more real conversation and get more honest about all this stuff. They're tools. They can be medicine, but they can be so self-destructive and so used against you. These ketamine clinics, be careful. You know, who are you working with? You're in a super suggestible state. Now you're in hypnosis. And now whoever, even before you got there, all of the stuff that went into your session is being influenced and imprinted in a way that you may not even recognize. And just be mindful of it. Just bring awareness to anything you do, I think. Awareness is the superpower of being human. And usually the breath is the component that allows you to slow down enough to even know that you have awareness. You know, so anyway, I like to rant about a lot of different things, but a lot of it's like the significance of these tools and how dangerous they can be if used incorrectly without awareness.
Absolutely.
And discernment. So
absolutely. I mean, discernment, I really feel like I formed this belief, right, a few years back that discernment really is the ultimate muscle to train in this lifetime, right? Because depending on what lineage you look into in terms of origin story, the one I'm a part of, they talk about how if our mission here is to become like God, right, which is not the mission of every life form in the universe, right? Like that's one thing I don't think a lot of people have thought into, right? If we are here to become like God, well, we need a soul with emotions to distinguish between good and evil. And the muscle for that is discernment. The more challenging part about this is I really don't feel there are people out there that are like, I'm going to do evil things, right? You look at even Bill Gates or any of these people, right? I think one of the common misperceptions is these people are evil, right? Now, here's the thing. Could they be expressing things that can be discerned as evil to someone who knows what truly good is? Yes. But I bet if you asked someone like Bill Gates or any of these venture capitalists or anything, they truly believe they're doing something good. That is why it is so important to have discernment, because people buy into their own narratives, right? And this isn't a judgment thing. This is just a discernment thing. And so it's important to be able to say, something just doesn't feel right about that. Now, what did we do to feminine energy overall? We completely bastardized it throughout society in the last, at least a couple hundred years. If you really look at the history, it goes back thousands, but you're feeling your feelings, right? Like, it's one of those things that for a long time, especially for men, was kind of laughed at, right? But at the end of the day, logic can be great when you're driving a car, when you have to do a math problem, but it's not the thing that's going to be able to tell you the quality of an individual, right? Like that's going to come deep within your heart. And it's important because, while I don't judge any of these individuals, I do have clear discernment, and I use that awareness to create actions that are in alignment with what I feel is truly good. And in order to make sure that I'm not falling into narratives, right? I work with coaches, I work with facilitators, I work with therapists, and I also connect with medicines, right? And when you were talking about Robert Forte's work, for anyone that is aware of cannabis, this is exactly what happened with cannabis, right? Like we're seeing it right now. If you ask the average individual, hey, what do you think is important with cannabis? They go, how much THC and what it looks like, right? They don't give a shit who grew it. They don't give a shit what the company that's selling it, their values are. They don't give a shit what they're doing with it. They're just going to watch Netflix and tune out. And again, I'm not here to judge that, but it is very interesting, right? Because if you look back to Chris Bennett's work, 10,000 years of recorded historical and spiritual use of cannabis, the plant was viewed much differently. Then you think about pharmaceutical industry's interests, right? Which is looking at, things like cancer, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then you start reading about how people can cure their own cancer with cannabis, right? You start reading about how they can help glaucoma, IBS. It can help spiritual things. It can help emotional things. It can help mental things. Well, what would you do, right? If you were a company that maybe believed you were doing the best thing, and maybe you really believed this plant was demonic or whatever it was, right? And you started realizing this plant was cutting into your business. Well, you'd probably start a smear campaign. And this is exactly what Andrew Mellon, Harry Anslinger, and these individuals did in the 30s, right? That's what the Tax Stamp Act happened and all this stuff, right? So again, we hear that saying a lot. If you don't learn history, you're deemed to repeat it or doomed to repeat it. But I think that's an intellectual concept for most people. They haven't embodied it yet and actually gone, what is happening right now? And is this history repeating itself?
Sure.
And it is in many ways, right? And what you were talking about with TikTok and all of these things, they're very synonymous in a way to psychedelics. They're extremely powerful tools, right? Now, there's a lot of good that can come from. We met through Instagram, right? That's fucking awesome, right? But also, how many scroll holes have I gotten in before I realized I wasted an hour of my life, right? Now, I don't blame the app for that, right? Now, again, you could look at like the developers and how they know how to put certain things in there. Yeah, sure. But it's me that's going on there. I am responsible to make sure I'm able to do that. Now, I'm 32. I have awareness, right? Of like, hey, I know that my screen time is up. Okay, I'm going to cut that back. You put that in a 14-year-old's hand or a 16-year-old's hand.
Yeah. When
I was 14 and 16, let's just say I did not have nearly the awareness I have now, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And you think about also how the parents of those children a lot of times are working jobs that they're stressed out at. They're on phones too, just trying to get a hit. Maybe they're in the wrong marriage. Who knows what's happening, right? And they just want some peace too and some time, right? So they're like, yeah, take the phone and just go with it, right? And so I don't know what the solution is, but it is worth talking about because again, I think the best solutions are found in communion with other people and communication with other people. And that's, again, why I love having this show because I don't pretend to have all the answers by any means, right? But I do want to ask good questions because I do feel there are certain questions that aren't being asked that when I'm looking around, that was my big identity crisis in the cannabis industry, right? Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. People coming in and, oh, how's your day going? Well, it sucks, but at least I'm here so I can get some joints, right? Or people coming in clearly in deep distress, right? I won't go into personal examples, but clearly in deep distress that are like, what is the highest percent you have? Sure. I need to forget everything, right? And me for a long time, like laughing at that and being like, well, cannabis doesn't give you cancer, so you can smoke it all day long or whatever. And then realizing, holy shit, this is much deeper than that. And I'm not doing anyone a service by providing them medicine in that way. And that was what ultimately made me leave the industry, right? And, again, at the end of the day, I really think life can be as simple as finding joy, giving it to others. And that's why service is so important, right? But again, I think most people have such a lack of awareness of even themselves that the I has to come before the we. And the we has to come before the all, right? And I think that, in order to really be of service, you got to be of service to yourself first, and I think that's where a lot of people are stuck right now. And I think that's why psychedelics are so booming right now because people are, like Jamie Wheel says, we have a meaning crisis going on, right? Like, religion has kind of died out. It's still there, but like, we're starting to see past the illusion of it. And the analogy I give a lot is that a lot of people say the world is worse than ever right now. I'm like, well, is it really worse than ever, or are we just opening up, more aware? Exactly.
Too much information about things that we never even had access to.
Exactly.
If we knew what was happening in the 1600s to everything on the other side of the planet, we'd be like, this is chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
This is actually the easiest time in human history. But it's just different measures. It's like, what are we looking at? What are we comparing it to? It's truly just a choice of awareness. But we are bombarded with too much apathy, too much awareness. And then even the self-help movement, it's like you were just saying about being a coach. And some people have their first experience, or I was talking to my buddy Pete about it. There's people that are in a one-bedroom apartment. They don't know what to do with their life, yet they're running a coaching program and they're trying to tell other people how to become successful and how to be rich or healthy. And that's a huge, weird, disgusting movement too. The self-help movement to make money or to get status. And it's like, you have to do 20 years of work. Like, he's done work. I've seen him go through much of his own path to create companies and create opportunities for himself, but he's not trying to build a blueprint the whole way down the road. He's like, no, I'm learning, I'm humble, I'm creating. And he's created, now he could easily coach in that space, but he doesn't even feel ready for that yet. He's still busy trying to create and learn and connect and serve. And I look at many different people like that are grinding and doing the work, but they're not out in the self-help movement coaching space. And too many people in the psychedelics or the get fit, people, they're like selling supplements and they're selling ideas. And it's like, you haven't even began to learn yourself. Even breathwork for me, it took me a long time to learn breathwork, practice breathwork, have a daily practice, go to many workshops, pay the money, pay the price. And I wasn't talking about it too much to anybody. I was just learning and reading and trying to learn from Groff and Dan Brule and all these people, and then feeling the benefits of it. And then going, oh my God, I need to share this with my friends, my people I love, my mother, my father, my guys at work. And then it's like it started to become more of an obligation to share, because otherwise I'm just doing the whole thing where you're like, oh, how blissed out can I get? I can stay in the sunshine. I can use the sauna, the cold plunge. I can do all this shit to feel good. But how am I showing up to work? Am I even sharing any of it? So I think we lead by example better than we can to speak and about all this stuff. And I always tell my friends, I'm like, I just try to show up to work happy, healthy, strong, and enjoy it. And I do. And I think that shows a new guy more than if I was to sit there and I was 200 pounds overweight or burned out and I treated patients really bad, or I just didn't like my job and I was on the verge of divorce and I'm an alcoholic and I'm stuck on pain meds and all the things. It's like, that's probably not a good example of being fit for service or being healthy. And so I've always just been like, do the work, keep yourself healthy, make your own bed type thing, the Jordan Peterson rants. It's like, yeah, clean up your environment. Become a healthy, happy, strong, whatever your peace is, your joy is. And then that is the teaching. That's the doing. And stay in that beginner's mind. A lot of people tell me how good they feel when they leave my presence sometimes, just because I'm so curious. And I can walk into a building and I'm always just like blown away by who built this whole space and created it. And it's just become this thing where I'm very interested in things. And I think curiosity is contagious.
Mind of a child.
And people do it to me. Yeah, kids do it to me all the time. This little girl one time was like out in the water in winter. And I was like, oh my God, it looks freezing. And then she's like, come feel with me. I'm like, oh man. So I went over there and like next thing you know, we're all rolling around in the water and playing. And so I think kids are the best teachers. And it's like, how do we unpack and unlearn and get back to being human beings and not human doings and measuring ourselves based on whatever your success measure is. It could be money and status and all that stuff, but it's probably a false roof to get on. You're laddering the wrong building. And so anyway, I like to try to take the high view and try to climb the mountain and look down below and see like, what am I going to get busy doing? Maybe I should stay up here and take account for what's already good. If you can't even take account for what's already good and be grateful and appreciate the fact that your lungs work, your brain works, you live in the easiest time in human history, if you're in the West at least, and start to just take account for that, which changes your state and it changes your relationship to your experience, which I think is the foundation for being a healthy, happy, vibrational human going forward. Then you're trying to create outside of yourself and you're trying to do all this stuff to bring joy and happiness and health in, but you haven't even taken account for what's already awesome. So I have a really deep foundational practice, which has just gotten easier to cultivate habits of gratitude, which are just maps that bring you into certain states. And it's just awesome. You can be grateful for anything, anytime, even if you're in the freaking Holocaust. I don't want to end up there, and thank God I'm not in it, but look at what Viktor Frankl did inside of that chaos. He found ways to serve others. He looked at what he did have as far as resources went. And it's like, that's actually the most meaningful life, is to look around and take account for what's happening in your environment and find ways to make it better for others. You get more joy out of actually serving others than to, try to make yourself climb this illusional ladder of how much money can I make and how much shit can I accumulate and what's my status? What's your job? Like when you go to a cocktail party or something, what do you do for a living? It's like, I don't know. How do you think? How's your life been? What do you think about the nature of reality? I don't know. Is it really that important what you do as far as your job goes? It's not our identification anyway. If you come into my house, you'd never know that I was a fireman. But it's a huge chapter of my life, and it's beautiful, and it's served me, and I've been so grateful to do it. But it's not my identity. It's like it's going to be a death soon. It's coming to an end where I'm like, man, what a beautiful, which actually makes me want to enjoy it more, cooking with the guys and hanging out and just being there and truly enjoying it. Because then it's going to be a little tiny box of a memory in the past. And I'll be like, damn, how present was I for any of those moments? Or was I always looking forward, like, what should I be doing? So I've tried to kill the shoulds and try to eliminate the idea of shoulds. It took me a long time, 10 years ago, to be able to sit still in my backyard and not feel okay about it. I remember being like, I should be doing something. I'm just wasting time here. And then I realized until you feel comfortable right here on your day off, you just worked yesterday, be still and stay there until you feel comfortable, until you can be grateful, until you can take account for what feels good here. And that took me about 3 years of practicing that. And now I'm really good at it. I mean, I can go lay it in the creek and have a day off and just be like, man, I wish I could bring all the people I love here because they're so busy. Busyness is a form of laziness. It's a form of distraction. And I'm not against working hard. When I know what I want to do, I drive forward and I do it. But I think awareness is key, and it takes slowing down. And I really do believe you start with taking account. You become the accountant. Where am I at? Where am I spending my energy? Why am I spending my energy in these spaces? And usually it's busyness to avoid confronting the nature of reality, which is like, oh shit, what am I doing here? What do I think happens when I die? Man, my parents are going to die soon. I should call them. I should probably spend more time with them because they're not here for very long. And so I look at death as like the most important thing to meditate on. Everyone laughs at work because like every call we get, I'm like, well, it could be my last call. And it's sort of dark, but not really. It actually makes me enjoy that call. And I could care less. If I died on that call, I'm going to be grateful that I already had a life. You know, I've gotten pretty comfortable with, I think, death. It's more about like, how are we going to live here? And how grateful can we be? And how present can we be? So trying to be present can't happen if you aren't comfortable with the giant unknown, which is like, what happens when this thing's over? And it could be just micro deaths of like the fire department is a death. It truly is. This moment that we're here, it's going to be a memory really quickly. And it's like this tiny little distant thing. So I use it as a beautiful, even looking at history, I like to zoom up and look forward and be like, man, the future is so beautiful. And it's amazing that my mind in this moment can zip up and look forward and see possibilities. It's amazing. And it happens in the present moment. And then to zip up and look back when I'm on a plane ride or something, be like, can you imagine what someone 200 years ago would think if we were just flying in a jet tube and they just offered me a Tito soda and like you're just looking out a window and you're flying over the country, no risk at all, really. And it just took so long to get to that space, and it all came out of the imagination and ingenuity. And so I like to be blown away all the time, and I blow my own mind all the time by just using our cognition. And it's good. It's awesome. It actually makes you not be caught up in like, oh God, the Wi-Fi doesn't work on this plane. What are we doing? This plane ride sucks. It's like, I can't not feel good on a plane ride. I'm still the 3-year-old on a plane ride, trying to look out the window, and people are probably annoyed by me, you know? So I think that we can use our cognition and choose where we place our attention once we bring awareness to it to select for how we want to feel and how we want to relate to it. So I think our relationship to our past and our relationship to the future and our relationship to every experience we have is all we actually have any willpower over at all. And I think that's huge. I mean, when I write down the things I wish I would have known before I got to a certain age, or what I would want to know if I was to die tomorrow, I write down from those vantage points. I'm like, shit, you better tell people that stuff. You know, first of all, gratitude is medicine. It's first principle. It should be your first prayer. Thank you for letting me have cognition at all. There's something happening from nothing. Thank you for that. My lungs are working. My heart is pumping. It's amazing. Something's happening. And I don't even know what the heck's going on. Nobody does. It's very complex. It's very mysterious. And that's an important first prayer, I think, is gratitude. Okay. And then it's like you move into these other principles. And I don't think people ever define their principles of cognition, and that's fine. But it can lead you into nihilism and into momentum and into traps that get you to be like, man, was I ever there for any of my human experience? And Bella, my dog who passed a year ago, was one of my best teachers because she was so present, right? And so loving. And I would go on walks with her and I would just be like in my head for 10 minutes before I realized like, shit, I wasn't even on this walk. You know, and I'm looking at her smelling everything and so happy and so present. And I'm like, oh yeah, come back to the breath. So my walking with Bella practice was my breathing practice, and it was my awareness practice, which turned into like when I'm pushing the sled, it's a breathing practice and an awareness practice. When I'm with my buddy Pete, it's a breathing practice, and I'm not sitting there doing breath work, but I am aware of my breath when I'm sitting with him at certain points. And I'm like, God, look at this. Someday we're going to be 80 years old and be looking back at these moments when we were young bucks riding bikes through the city. It's amazing. So I'm trying to be more lucid. And I think just dropping in, trying to be more present and of service is the foundation for me of a good life. Because when you get to the closer to the deathbed, and I'm on the over the hill, supposedly I'm 42, but I'm really going, man, how present am I for my life? And usually it's not very much, and that's okay, but you get better at it by bringing awareness to it and starting to realize that death is a gift to bring you into the present, to enjoy the thing that's already psychedelic. It's already weird. It's already mysterious. And so get back into that awe and wonder. So the medicine isn't all that.
100%. I mean, dude, that was absolutely amazing. I got to give you a knuckle pound on that one.
That's just the truth, right? That's my truth.
100%. And I resonate highly with that because, as someone who spent a lot of my life very overstimulated and still notices very often where like, oh man, why am I packing my schedule so full? Why do I feel like I need to be doing so much, right? And I speak about this openly because if I don't share it, how can I expect anyone else to, right? And I imagine that's the same reason you share these things, right? And I think that's the whole idea of embodiment, right? Like that's the whole idea of being able to take something from an intellectual concept into a sense of being. And that's why I love what you said too about, coaches and all of these things. Like it's a trendy thing, right? And I think it, is great. It's great in theory, but I think a lot of people are trying to serve others before they've served themselves, right? And also, I think the best coaching you can ever do is just simply embody, right? Like embody who you are, and the right people will go, hey man, you look really happy. What are you doing?
The beginner's mind is the teaching.
Exactly. And once they ask that, now the invitation's been made. And now that person is receptive to what you're going to tell them next, right? And what you share with them, right, from personal experience, maybe it gives them an idea, right? Or something they can take and go run with, And that was for me, like I started seeing examples of who I wanted to become. And I started asking them like, hey, how did you get to this type of space, right? For you, I imagine it's someone like Don Howard, right? Like meeting these individuals in my life that were so heart-centered, it challenged my whole way of being, right? Maybe the buzz term is to say it triggered me, right? Or whatever that is. It's another word like trauma. But, again, like it was one of those things that I was like, holy shit, like there's different ways to live, right? And that's fucking awesome. And just like death, I think another great teacher is pain. Pain isn't a great teacher. Amazing. It tells you, hey, something is off. But what do we do in modern day society? Oh, you have a headache? No. You just have an Advil deficiency. Here, take this pill, numb that signal away, get back to work.
Yeah.
And
the symptom.
Exactly. And I think that that's all a lot of us are doing throughout our lives, or I'll make it personal. That's all I was doing for a lot of my life is managing.
True.
And it's like the idea of surviving, right? When you're surviving, you can't be thriving, right? They're opposite ends of different spectrums. And so, or opposite ends of the same spectrum. And so if you want to be able to thrive, it takes you asking first, why am I not feeling like I'm able to thrive? And that takes courage. That takes faith also that there's some type of answer awaiting you. But you have to empty your cup completely and go back to the beginner's mindset of like, okay, I thought I knew all of these things, or maybe I still know these things, but they're not the things that are leading me to where I want to go now. So now I must empty my cup and go back down to a beginner's mindset, gain new knowledge, then through that knowledge, gain understanding, and then through service, gain wisdom, right? But then at a certain point, you'll realize, oh my God, I'm now boxed in again. I got to empty my cup again. And that's like the ever evolving triangle of service, right? And at the end of the day, as Ram Dass says, we're all walking each other home. I don't think any of us are meant to figure it all out. And the analogy I give for this is, what was the best part when you were a kid of Christmas morning, right? If you celebrated Christmas, for anyone listening, it's like, it wasn't opening the gifts. It wasn't even necessarily picking what you wanted. It was coming down and knowing there was something there, but you didn't know what it was yet. That was the best part, right? Having your family there, not knowing what was going to be in the boxes. The second you open the boxes, you're like, oh my God, maybe you're excited. You got exactly what you want. And then 2 months later, you forgot about that thing, right? So it's like, what if we can extrapolate that out, that microcosm into a macrocosm of like, what aspects of life have we told ourselves like, it's no big deal, but actually maybe is a big deal. And maybe there's a mystery waiting for us that if we tuned into it, we didn't have to be so concerned with getting an answer, but being absolved into the mystery. And that's why for me, I love philosophy. That's why I got into psychedelics, because I realized real quick, holy shit, I know nothing. And in that moment was so much liberation. I was like, oh my God, why did I walk around my whole life think I needed to know anything, right? Like that's the biggest thirst trap. And is it even possible to know anything? Because there is no objectivity to the universe. Everything is subjective. And so at the end of the day, you see blue, I see blue. We might agree it's blue, but we don't know we're seeing the same color. Right. And that's why, again, with psychedelics, it's like, even though I've had beautiful experiences, I've had some very challenging ones too. But even though I've had beautiful experiences, I would be being irresponsible if I came on the show and said, everyone should do these, dose the planet. Right. Like, that to me is something that, like, just like you were saying, like I've met some amazing individuals that do not need psychedelics, right? Like all I think about these things as are reminders, right? And I've spoken to many of the spirits of these, plants or, different substances. And, they're all kind of saying the same thing. They're like, hey man, cool, but don't go worship me, right? You can hold me in high regard or, bring me into sacred union with you, but, don't worship me, because like, that's like saying, hey, it's not the moon or sun, it's the finger I'm going to worship that's pointing me back to the moon or sun. But if you worship the finger, what do you miss? The moon and sun, right? That's like, if you really think about it, like inner awareness, your God self, whatever you want to call it, right? Your purpose for being here, whatever that is. It's like at the end of the day, these are reminders. They're a pit stop, not a rest stop, and at the end of the day, I think right now, one of the big challenges that I'm seeing, and I went through this in my own life, right? So again, no judgment. That's why I'm so easy able to see it, right? You see clearly what you've gone through, right? And what also you are, is that for a long time, I thought the work was actually doing the medicine, but it's much scarier than doing the medicine. No matter how scary anyone listening might think the medicine is, it's coming back to a sober state of reality and making the necessary changes to unlock that psychedelic magic in your everyday life. Because it takes being vulnerable. It takes maybe being wrong, right? It takes having to take the high road. It takes, when your family doesn't understand you, not saying, oh, fuck them, they don't get it, right? But actually saying, hey, you know what? Why don't they understand me? And you know what? Maybe if, there's boundaries being crossed or whatever, I'm going to hold them in love, but also create a boundary, right? Like that shit is hard. That's the work, right? But at the end of the day, that's what allows you to be that lighthouse that I was mentioning earlier that then goes and empowers the entire world around you. And that's the world that I'm extremely excited to be a part of, to know people like you, to know people like Pete, to know people like Shlomo, to know people like all of you guys listening, the people in my mastermind that are choosing to get uncomfortable so that eventually we can be of service in greater and greater and greater magnitudes, because again, the work never ends. And that's not to say you should get stuck there, right? To me, it's like a kid, right? A kid isn't worried about when they're going to get sad the next time or what's maybe in there. They're joyful, then an emotion comes up. They've yet to be programmed that certain emotions are bad or undesirable. And so they just feel that emotion and they cry it out. They throw a temper tantrum, right? And it triggers the hell out of a lot of adults around them, right? I think really it's not because it's like, oh, you have to look a certain way. It's because adults know deep down they need that too, and they're not allowing themselves to. But once that kid is done with that, they go back to their natural state of being, which is joy, right? And so I think for a lot of us, we're just like clogged drains, that's definitely what I was, and still find myself getting into, and I find new layers, but that's okay because I tune into joy, and then when something comes up, I try my hardest always to have the courage to look into it and be able to ask good questions and go into it with curiosity, not judgment. And again, it's simple, not necessarily easy, but it is 100% necessary, as I've found, to be able to live a highly fulfilling life. And the best part is, when you start being of service and you start seeing other people that hit you up and they're like, wow, that thing you said really helped, right? It just gives you this feeling of like, holy shit, that's wild, right? Because I'm getting helped from people that are saying things that I'm like, oh my goodness, that helped me a lot. And so to be able to pay it forward like that and have that reciprocity is amazing. I mean, most of us, at least for me, I grew up thinking pay it forward was like, oh, buy someone's Dunkin' Donuts, buy their coffee. And that's great, right? That is a form of it, but it can go much deeper than that. And it can be much more 5D, to use new terminology, than 3D, right? You don't have to just help people out buying their meal. You could also hold the door for someone or smile at them, and that could stop them from committed suicide. You never know what the trickle-down effects are going to be of just being a joyful person. Right. And that to me is why I do everything.
And trying to be a present person to the best of your ability. I think if you're present, you know exactly what to do in that moment. Yeah. So one of the things too is non-ordinary states of consciousness, psychedelic experiences, which are just sort of a non-ordinary. One of the best ways, I think, and you're probably aware of this, is travel. And so for people that want to expand their consciousness or just their awareness or their relationship to reality and to get out of their bubble, just go to another country, go to Japan or go to South America or go to another, even a state. You go to some states in this country and they're like they're like different countries because they're such different cultures, and culture is basically cognition on a scale. So it's consciousness at large, and you get to see how different people operate and live. And that's a beautiful way to expand your mind. That's been huge for me, is to just see that my little micro world is not reality at all. And there's so many different religious beliefs and ways people live and what they think is normal and what they even eat and how they feel and all of it. And I think that's beautiful because it gets you outside of your normal framework, and it helps you to remember that every human being is another universe. They're like these big, giant, weird beings like you, and they are insecure and they don't know what's going on, and they're conditioned and they're playing out their lives, and it's just as big as your universe, because the universe is really an interpretation of your cognitive state. So I always think like Robert Anton Wilson, he's one of my favorite writers and thinkers, and thank God they recorded him before he died. But one of the things he would always say is just remember that this whole thing is interacting processing. And when you start to remember that, you start to remember that you're interpreting reality through your own cognitive experience. And that is not reality. It's just you interpreting reality. So the universe is just an interpretation, and everyone has a different one. So it helps you to become a little more compassionate at the end of the day, and nice and accepting. And I'm not great at it. I'm not virtue signaling here. I'm pretty judgmental, and I'm pretty, human. But it does help you to ease that. Whoa, they're different. They think, and then you don't get stuck in some group or camp of how I think. I'm a left person. I'm a right person. I'm a green person. I'm a blue person. And it's like people want to put themselves in these boxes, and it just doesn't work well. It just divides us. And at the end of the day, yoga is union, right? It just remembering that you're connected to all other beings, and they're just all off in their own little matrix doing their best. And you'd be them if you had all their experiences up to that point. So now I'm a little nicer, and you just treat them like, oh, look at that one at the zoo. You don't judge the animals. You just treat them nice. You're like, oh, cool. They're actually more interesting. Let's explore it. And then you start to break down the things that are different and look at the things that are similar. And the differences are beauty too. So I like to glorify the differences as cool. How neat. How boring would it be if everybody thought like me? That would be horrible. I have really good friends that think completely different than me, and those are my favorite friends that push back on my belief systems and my ways of thinking. And then we agree to disagree, and we shouldn't be too offended. And if we are offended, that's our problem. It's like, we have to start getting away from this walking on eggshells, and everybody's worried about how they think and what they say. And I don't want to offend people. Cancel culture. It's the worst thing ever. It's like, no, I want to be around people that press me, push me, make me feel a little bit triggered, and make me reanalyze my thoughts. And maybe I should just agree to disagree and go, cool. Well, we don't all want to agree, because otherwise this world would suck. How do we just live together in cohesion and start to respect each other and find ways to collaborate and connect? And I think we need to start stripping away this idea that we're all supposed to be in a camp. Identity camps, identification culture. It's like such bullshit, but anyway.
Dude, I mean, once again, spoken like a true wizard. I mean, that is 100% accurate. And dude, Ryan, I have enjoyed this so much. I can't even believe an hour just went by. I checked the clock. I'm like, holy shit, that felt like 10 minutes, right? That's pure presence right there,
Flow.
And dude, where can people find you, right? I know you're hosting Breathwork out in Phoenix. Where can I send people? It'll be in the show notes too, but just so they can hear it right from the horse's mouth, as they say, right? Where can I send people to find more info about you, to learn about your breath work? I'm definitely going to get you back on for round 2, maybe when I come out to do the Walter Camp in October. But where can people find you, man?
I do breathwork under Breathe with the number 4 flow.com, or you can go to the Instagram Breathe 4 Flow, or a Wonder Junkie. That's my Instagram handle, and I just have been going by that because that seems to be my nature. So you can find me there. That'd be easy, because then it's not my phone number, and then people aren't texting me that I don't know.
Yeah. You want to be careful who you open yourself up to, right? Yeah. It's a lot of energy.
Cool.
Dude, I
Thanks,
love that,
brother.
man.
It's been fun, man.
Of course.
I always enjoy talking to you.
Dude, likewise, man.
Yeah,
and
cheers.
I have one last question for you, man, and that is this. And this is kind of like the entire subject matter of our episode, so this will be really pertinent. Let's say someone listens to this, and they're interested in checking out psychedelic medicines in their own life. What is the one piece of advice you would offer them to allow them to use proper discernment in choosing whether or not these medicines are right for them?
It's hard to put a blanket statement for anyone, because each person's so different. So it depends on the individual to have the conversation. But I always want to say, trust yourself, and go and do your research and really take your time. Don't rush into anything. Maybe it's not even a good idea, right? Like, just start to explore and to get curious and start to listen a little deeper to yourself, to your inner wisdom, and start to listen to people that you trust that are maybe wiser than you too, because I found some incredible elders and people around that I truly was like, okay, there's good mechanics out there, there's good dentists out there, and there's also really cool people in the space, like Don Howard. I got lucky. I waited 7 years to meet him. And when I met him, it was his last ceremony. So anyway, take your time. Be present. You'll know. Don't just rush into this stuff. And maybe don't do it. Come try breathwork. You can get to the same non-ordinary state. It's more gentle. It's safe. It's effective. It's legal. So don't do psychedelics unless you really feel called to do it.
Yes,
All right.
I love that. Guys, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This was an absolute pleasure, Ryan. I can't wait to have you back on and dive back down the rabbit hole. I hope all of you are having the best day of your entire life out there. Remember to be the lighthouse for everyone in your life and follow your heart. It will never lead you astray. Love you guys. Till next time.